to grow your show. Jay, thank you. Hi, everyone. This is Jay with Podcast Movement, one of the team members here, and we have Jay Klaus. He's with the Creative Elements Podcast, and he's going to be talking about how you can use Twitter to grow your show. Jay, thank you for being a part of this today.
Jared, so great to be here. Thanks, Podcast Movement, for having me. Really excited about this. We got a lot to cover and get into, so I'm ready to get started if you are, Jared.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. I will share my screen. We're here today to talk a little bit about one of my favorite platforms, which is Twitter, which more and more I'm thinking of Twitter as playing in service to my actual favorite platform, which is podcasting and my podcast, Creative Elements, as Jared mentioned in the beginning of this. My name is Jay Klaus. I'm the host of Creative Elements. On that show, I'm learning how your favorite creators do what they do. I talk to people like Seth Godin and James Clear, and instead of talking to them about specifically one piece of their work or a project that they're doing, I talk to them about how they were able to make a living from their art and creativity. And it's been really, really fun. I also want to introduce you to our cat, Baloo, for no other reason than I love him and he's adorable, and I feel like you would like to see how adorable he is too. I've never added this in a slide deck before, but I had so much fun putting it in here. As you know, and as I know, podcasting is awesome. My show, Creative Elements, has been where I've been putting the majority of my own creative focus over the last year and a half, and that has paid off in small and big ways. It's been featured in Stitcher, and Pocket Casts, and Castro, and Apple Podcasts. I've been able to talk to people like Seth Godin and James Clear, Vanessa Van Edwards, Matt Diavella, Ali Abdaal, Pat Flynn. And the show has done pretty well. We launched it in March of 2020, which is very auspicious timing, if you remember what was happening in March of 2020. And then in just about a little under 2 years, I will reach the 1 million downloads mark, which is great. But what really gets me excited, better than those numbers, are pieces of feedback about the show like this from David Perel after our conversation, where he said, "This interview is unlike most of the ones I've done because it's so well edited. It's less like a traditional interview and more like an NPR show. We spoke about growing a Twitter audience, my time working as a television anchor, and how I failed at every institutional game I've ever played." I love hearing feedback like this from my guests because a lot of my guests go on a lot of shows. And when they tell me that my show stands out from a production standpoint or from the final product standpoint, that means a lot, and that's the bar that I'm trying to hit. Luckily, listeners seem to agree with that assessment, and things are going pretty well. I take the production quality of my show very seriously, as I'm sure you do as well. I take storytelling very seriously. There's a lot of editing. This is the second edit on a typical episode of Creative Elements. So I want more people to know and listen to my show. But there's just one problem, and that is that podcast discovery is not good. First I had on the slide, podcast discovery is terrible. Then I had podcast discovery is bad. But let's just say that podcast discovery is not good. And I'd love to hear in the chat if you agree with that, if you are frustrated with podcast discovery. I'd also love to hear a little bit about your show. So in the chat, let me know what your show is. Give me the name, give me a very quick summary of it. I'll be able to see that here in the comments. And I want to just know a little bit more about you and what you're doing. So if podcast discovery is not good, how can we grow our shows? There are a few things that we know work in growing your show. We know that guesting on other shows is good. We know that cross promotions on other shows, or being a guest swap, going on someone else's show, having them come on your show, we know that that works. We know that being featured in listening apps works really well. And by this, I mean those features in the discovery section of Apple Podcasts, CastBox, Pocket Casts, Castro, Stitcher. If you're able to get your show highlighted in the Discover page of listening apps, that's where you can find a lot of growth for your show. But that's really challenging. That's a really high bar. People in positions of, editorial choice at those teams have to know your show exists. So it's difficult to get there. Getting shout outs from influencers also works well. This is underexplored, in my opinion, maybe a topic for a future talk here with Podcast Movement University. But if somebody within your, niche, somebody that your target listener already looks up to, shouts out your show, that can be really, really effective. And then there's slowly funneling people from all other channels, because the first 3 bullets on this list, as you'll notice, all have to relate to podcasting and audio already. Because if we know one thing, it's that audio converts to audio. It's a lot easier for somebody who has already shown that they care about listening to podcasts to start listening to your show than try to convert somebody who hasn't listened to a podcast before. And there's just a fair amount of friction going from one platform to another. So even if you have an email newsletter, as I do, and you put a link to your podcast in that newsletter week after week, as I do, there's still a fair amount of friction in going from, okay, I'm reading on my phone, I'm in email reading mode. Now I'm going to commit to listening to 30 to 90 minutes of audio. It's a big ask, right? So I put slowly on here, not to discourage you, but to properly set your expectations. Because while I think we should be doing all these things, like you should aim for all of these strategies for growing your show, you want to catch them all. What I'm focusing on here today with this conversation is the last one, funneling people from other channels. Because I imagine you are trying to do the top few. And if you're not, please, please, please do so. Try to be a guest on other shows. Try to do cross promos or guest swaps with other shows. Try to build relationships with these different players and the teams behind them so you can get your show featured, or try to make such a great show that is doing so well and listeners love so much that those apps can't ignore you. And even getting shout outs from influencers. You should identify who those people are and try to get in touch with them, try to get your show in front of them. It's kind of a dance. It's a talk for another day, because today we're talking about moving people from other channels and specifically Twitter. And here's why. You, as an individual, as a host, are more discoverable than your podcast. Podcasts are just inherently difficult to share. They aren't very discoverable from search engines. It's getting better. It's a lot easier now for people to find your show on Google Podcasts specifically, but it's still really hard. Even if somebody wants to share an episode of your show, figuring out how to share just a link to that episode and having it look good when it's shared on social media or an email, it's just really tough. It's not there yet. So discoverability suffers because of it. But you as a host, you are much more discoverable than your show. What do I mean by that? Well, think about where you as an individual show up. Social media is a big one. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook, Snapchat. You're probably putting some level of effort to show up on those platforms already, right? Your website. You probably have a website for yourself. If you don't, it might be something worth striving to have. But a lot of people in the game of podcasting are creators and they already have a personal website, which means you might be showing up in search results on Google, on YouTube, on Pinterest. If you have other media you're creating, like articles, like YouTube videos, you are benefiting probably, hopefully, from some organic search traffic from search engines, including, like I said, Google, YouTube, Pinterest. You might have an email newsletter, as I do. These are all funnels, slow funnels, long-term funnels, but very useful, important, necessary funnels to get people to know that your show exists, to discover you, and to discover your show. But the catch is people love to have one-to-one connections in their brain bank. For whatever reason, we love to categorize things as human beings, and we love to think this for that. So when people think of you, are they connecting you to your podcast? This is something that I struggled with for a really long time because I hate being pigeonholed. I hate being put in a box. I do all kinds of projects, all kinds of things that I'm really proud of. Some of those things generate more income than my podcast does. And I thought I needed to lead with those things to say that I was a freelancer or a consultant doing this or that. That's how I make my money. But what I found was whatever I lead with, whatever I talk about as my thing, that is what people associate with me and hold in their memory and create this one-to-one connection. They can't or won't, but probably can't hold this idea of Jay does multiple things. Jay can be thought of for multiple reasons. They like to put you in a box. So if people, when they think of you, aren't connecting you to your podcast, then the discovery of you, the discovery of your other work is not converting into discovery of your podcast. It's probably not helping your podcast much at all. We need to know that you take your show very, very seriously. We need to know that it is something that we should take seriously as a potential listener, because while I think there is still just a ton of opportunity in podcasting, I think the latest numbers I saw for number of YouTube channels was like 37 million, and there's about 3 million podcasts. It's not apples to apples. YouTube tends to be shorter form in most cases, but that just makes you really think like we are still so early days here. So there's a ton of opportunity, but there's more competition all the time. And if I'm a podcast listener and I'm already allocating 7 hours of my week to listening to podcasts, and that's probably not growing that much because my commute's not changing, my habits aren't changing, and your podcast is new to me, I need a reason to believe that I should unseat one of my other shows I listen to and give it a chance. And how am I going to take your show seriously if I don't think that you are really taking your show seriously, especially in the beginning when you don't have a ton of listeners who are sharing your show actively on social media or talking about it actively, and you really have a flywheel going of organic growth. In the beginning, you need to be your show's biggest advocate. You need to make yourself discoverable, and you need to lead with your show so that we are connecting you to your show. Really, really easy way to do this is on social media. You can see here, these are screenshots of my Twitter, my LinkedIn, my Instagram. All of them, every single one of them leads with host of Creative Elements. I want there to be no doubt that this is the most important aspect of my productive work, creative life right now. If I am telling you this is the first thing you need to know about me, people are going to think, wow, that show must be doing really well. I should check that out. Especially because now that it's about 2 years old, people have probably seen me talk about this. But people are self-interested. They don't pay a whole lot of attention to anything that you do. They might not have listened to your show yet. And a lot of times, even the people that we love and we care about a lot, they launch a new project and we think that's cool, but we don't have a lot of high hopes. We don't have high expectations. We think like this will just be a fun thing for them and maybe they'll even give it up. So the longer that you are podcasting and the more that you lean into, this is what I'm really focusing on, the more people start to think, wow, Jay's been talking about that podcast for a couple of years now, and this is what he's leading with and telling me that he's doing with his time. The show must be doing pretty well. I guess I should probably check that out. People who are aware of your podcast might have never listened, and it might take them months or even years to listen to their first episode, even if they know that you're doing it. So, easy way here to make discovery of you equal discovery of your podcast. Lead with it. When people find you online, what is the first thing they learn about you? Is it your show? If not, it's a missed opportunity, and they're probably not going to go deeper into what you're doing to find it. Similarly, you see a link in the bio of Instagram and Twitter here. That goes to a short page here that has a link to some of my projects. This list changes in priority based on what I've most recently used as a call to action, because on Twitter, on Instagram, I'll frequently say like, hey, just did this thing, link is in my bio, especially on Instagram. And if I say link in my bio, I want people to find the thing I just shouted out as quickly as possible when they go to that link. So you see here at the top, I have Join Tweet 100. This is a project that is very Twitter specific. It's been really great for the podcast, actually. I'll talk about that here in a minute. But a lot of the people, most people who go to this page are coming from Twitter, and they're coming from Twitter because they saw a tweet with the hashtag tweet100. And so I'm trying to make that really simple for them to join. But shortly thereafter, you see listen to creative elements. I recently redesigned the homepage of my website. So greeting you right on the homepage of my website, listen to creative elements. Here's a short description of creative elements. We explore how remarkable creators found their creative independence. Through narrative interviews, we do a deep dive into the nitty-gritty of how the world's best creators make a living from their art and creativity. Has a logo, has buttons to view all episodes and subscribe to the show. So, in short, if you find me, you're finding creative elements. I am almost certain of it. If you take any time to read what I'm about on any of the platforms that I'm on, the first thing you're going to come across is the show. And because that is what I'm leading with, if you're taking me seriously, you're going to take that show seriously. I see some comments here from John from Cleveland, Ohio. Hello, John. Jorge agreed with me about discoverability. Amy from St. Louis. Hello. Steve, good to see you. Thanks for joining, everybody. If you have questions along the way, please put them in the comments. I will try to answer them in real time if they're relevant to where I'm at. If I address it later, I'll let you know and I'll keep going, but we will have some time for questions at the end. So with all the different platforms I just showed, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, why am I focusing on Twitter for the purposes of this conversation? Twitter as a platform right now is really focused on growth. Kamari just said, just sub to Creative Elements on Spotify. Love to hear that, Kamari. Thank you. Please let me know what you think. Why focus on Twitter? Twitter's focused on growth, and they're doing it really well. For a long time, the criticism of Twitter was that they were really slow in improving and innovating on the product. And that is not the case anymore for the last year or so. They are really very rapidly shipping new features, even destroying new features at times. You know, they had Twitter fleets. You know, when they released fleets, it was basically the story equivalent for Twitter. They put it out. They actually removed it within, less than a year. Crazy. But they keep pushing new things like topics. Topics are kind of like SEO on Twitter. You can subscribe to topics, and the algorithm starts to notice when people are speaking about specific topics. And if you subscribe to a topic, you will see tweets from people talking about that topic, even if you don't follow them. So that's really great for organic reach. Twitter Spaces is a big thing, and I think will be a huge thing over the coming year or 2 years. These live voice-based events, it's no secret that they kind of ripped off Clubhouse, to be honest. They saw Clubhouse was doing well, and they said, we can do that in-house, and they're doing it very, very well, and they're pushing it. It is at the center of the navigation bar on mobile now. They're trying to get as many people as possible to utilize Twitter Spaces. You can host Spaces. You can talk about your show on Spaces. There's a lot of innovative things you can do with Spaces. Twitter bought a tool called Review, which is a newsletter tool. They're trying to push more long-form writing directly through Twitter that you can subscribe to. They have what's called super follows now, which is kind of like their answer to Patreon within the product, because you can subscribe to certain creators on Twitter. Creators can earn money from super follows, and some of the things that they write and share on Twitter will only be seen then by the people who are a super follower. Twitter actually finally revamped their verified program. I'm not verified, spoiler. But now there is no longer so much subjectivity in the Twitter verified program. You can go to your account settings and request verification. And in a lot of cases, before you even submit an application to verify yourself, you have to go through a couple steps, and it will tell you if you qualify. The whole process now is automated, which is really great for the product, for the platform. And what I see more and more are in my feed, I get a lot of tweets from people that I don't follow because that tweet was liked by somebody that I engage with quite a bit. So Twitter is saying, hey, just because you don't follow this person, one of the people that you do engage with quite a bit liked this tweet. So we thought you might want to see that too. So again, this is really great for organic reach because your tweets are getting more opportunities to be shown to people who don't follow you already. A follow on Twitter is so low friction, so low commitment. It's just a button click. I don't have to enter an email. I don't have to confirm anything. I just click a button. So people, in my experience, are more willing to follow you on Twitter than subscribe to your email list, than even follow you on Instagram, because the feed is so much bigger on Instagram. You want less clogging it up. Twitter is so fast. It's like a river of information. If you like something, you'll often follow them. As a result of this, organic reach is very strong on Twitter, stronger than I'm seeing on other platforms, unless you're doing like Reels on Instagram, in which case that's a great strategy right now. TikTok with their universal content distribution algorithm, still some good chance for organic reach on TikTok, but Instagram posts, much less so. Facebook, much less so. LinkedIn, not as much, but actually LinkedIn's pretty good. Facebook, no. I'm not even sure what Snapchat's solution to organic reach is at this point, but organic reach on Twitter is very strong, and I'll show you some examples here in a second. And people are growing their following on Twitter like crazy because of that. People are growing so fast. I am disappointed to say that the examples here are all men, and I apologize, but these are the first examples that came to mind for me of people that I have personally watched over the last year go from hundreds or maybe like single-digit thousands of followers to huge audiences, huge growth. What Dickie Bush has done with Ship 30 for 30 is really impressive. He started with, I think it was 300 followers just over a year ago. We talked about this on Creative Elements, actually. It's one of my most popular episodes, talking to Dickie about how he grew his Twitter following from like 300 people to almost 100,000 in a year and a half. Sahil Bloom, similar story. He, I feel like during quarantine, actually, he just decided that he was going to commit to doing threads on Twitter. And now he's over 300,000 followers. Alex Lieberman and Austin Reif, they are both co-founders of Morning Brew. Morning Brew really innovated on how companies use Twitter. And these guys went from single-digit thousands to over 100,000 in the last year and a half as well. And they're all doing it the same way. And it's threads. They're just using the threads feature on Twitter. It's where I see the most low-hanging fruit, easiest way to build your audience in mass across the internet. And the great thing about building a large audience on Twitter is now you can try to port that audience over to other things. This is the slow building of the funnel that I was talking about. If you lead with your podcast on Twitter in your bio, but you're able to drive a lot of attention to you and to your bio from your threads, then it's a magical combination, and it's been working for me very well in the last 4 or 5 months. So if you're not super familiar with Twitter, let me give you a quick rundown of threads versus tweets. And not even just what they are, because I think that's pretty obvious. A tweet is just the single post you put out there. A thread is a group of tweets that are connected together. So when you click into one, it's shown in the interface as connected to the other tweets. Tweets are what earn reach and impressions. Tweets are what get shared organically in people's threads. People see it. And you can have really good solo tweets that get a lot of engagement. But in my experience, and this is like a huge difference, threads are what earn followers. You may have a viral tweet that gets a ton of attention, but people don't often take the time to go from a viral tweet to your profile to following. They just kind of see it and they say, I like that. And they share it and whatever. But like that one tweet is very infrequently the reason that people will follow you. But for whatever the reason, if you have a thread that does really well, that teaches people something, right now, and this may change, I don't know, we may be in a magical time, but right now, if you have a thread that does really well, people will go to your profile, they'll follow you, they want to see threads. And threads are just a collection of related tweets. You can even have a thread of threads. A lot of times, guys like Sahil Bloom I was showing earlier, he has a running thread that he updates all the time with his best performing threads. So it's really easy to fall down the rabbit hole and learn a lot from somebody very quickly and feel like you're really connected to their way of thinking. It's pretty crazy. And the thing about threads is when done right, every tweet inside of a thread can have its own virality. And if one tweet within your thread is going viral and people are seeing that and they notice that it's part of a thread, they're going to read the whole thread. And now they may engage with your other tweets. On my 30th birthday in July, I put out really like the first thread I put real effort into, just sharing like, hey, here are 30 lessons I've learned over the last 30 years. And what was magical about this, and this is my most successful tweet ever, thousands of retweets on that opening thread, and every one of the tweets themselves had hundreds of likes. What's magical about this is every one of those tweets, as just a self-contained tweet from that thread, was interesting, and people were retweeting just individual tweets, which was getting activity on the full thread. It was really, really wild for a period of about 48 hours. Now, I had a star up here, an asterisk on the word followers, because something that's really important if you're going to jump into this world of constructing and writing threads on Twitter is that you need to be thoughtful about, well, what's this thread about? Because you want to attract the right followers, people who are really interested in your style of work, your perspective. And you should think about that like on average. You shouldn't write a thread that you think will be popular, but isn't indicative or aligned with what you would normally tweet about. Because here's how Twitter and any social media platform works actually with their algorithm. When you post something new, that platform takes that piece of content and will show it to a small segment of your audience first. And they will gauge based on the reaction of that small segment whether it was a good tweet that people will like and whether they will show it to more people within your audience. So the reason that you see some accounts with really big followings and very little engagement is because they probably built a large following of very different people and interests from what they're frequently talking about. Because if you have 100,000 followers that you grew because you were talking about baking cakes, and now you tweet about NFTs, it's going to show that tweet about NFTs to a small segment of your audience who came because they care about baking cakes. They're not going to engage with that tweet, and it's dead. It won't actually get shown to most of your followers. So it's really important to try and attract the right followers who are going to be interested in your perspective consistently based on what you're sharing. And so you can't just hack this and say, like, I'm going to look at what other people are doing well with threads about just any topic and try to make something that's popular to get a lot of attention and get a lot of followers if those people aren't going to be interested in your work, namely your podcast. So this thread that I shared in July led to ridiculous numbers. Like, these are absurd figures. That thread earned, I know this is like all of July, but we can really say probably 80 to 90% of these numbers were driven by this thread alone. Over 3 million impressions. Those tweets got in front of over 3 million unique people. 172,000 people visited my profile. And of those, about 4,000 people followed. That's not a great conversion percentage. And I'll talk about optimizing your profile here in a second. But net, what I gained was thousands of followers. That pushed me over the 10,000 follower mark. People are kind of shallow and they don't do a lot of research, and they use numbers and metrics as a measure for trustworthiness or quality. So social media followings, Twitter followings, like most of our world, is a rich get richer game, in my opinion. And so if you're able to get yourself to thousands of followers, over 10,000 followers, it actually gets easier to convert more people who visit your profile to a follower because they see, oh, wow, this person has 60,000 people following them. They must be writing something good. I'm going to go ahead and do that. So it feels slow in the beginning. I know. Don't be discouraged. It gets easier over time. And look, sometimes I hate Twitter. You probably hate Twitter too. Whether you're on it or not, you probably have had times where it's like, Twitter is the worst. But it's hard to argue with this data for the efficacy of what it can do for you, discoverability of you, and therefore discoverability of your podcast. So a couple things that I would prioritize on Twitter if you're going to put more time into Twitter. Spend more time creating than you spend browsing. You're not going to get more people looking at your profile and finding your show if you are just spending all of your time reading tweets. And it's really addicting and really easy to just spend time doom scrolling and reading tweets, but that is not going to get you to what you want if you're using Twitter to try to get more listeners for your show. So be sure to keep an eye on how you're spending your time and spend more time creating than browsing. When you are browsing, confine your browsing to curated lists. What some people will do with Twitter is be very, very choosy about who they follow. They want to keep their following number low because they think the ratio is good, and they sometimes want to curate their feed, which I totally get. You only want to see information that you want to see, right? And it seems like the best way to do that is just by curating who you are following and being really choosy in that way. But I kind of go the opposite direction. I know that people are working hard, and my audience is other creators, people who are aspiring to get where I am, people who are beyond where I am, but creators nonetheless. And I know how meaningful it is to support those people. So if somebody shows support for me or my work, if they talk about the podcast, if they buy one of my products, I'm going to follow them on Twitter. Of course I'm going to do that. I want to support them. I want to help them. Following on Twitter to me is more about support and connection and helping people. For curating the information that I learn and consume on Twitter, I use lists. I create specific lists for specific cases, whether it's a list of people who are into crypto and NFTs, so that if I want to learn from that, I can just swipe over to that list and read tweets just from accounts like that. Or people that are interested in community building, I will do that sometimes. Or a list of people that I'm trying to just build relationships with. I can create a list of people that I want to engage with. I browse just their tweets. I support them through that way. Using lists is super, super underrated for how to consume information on Twitter. I think you should foster community within your followers. Someone that I've gotten to know over the last 4 months or so, his name is Jeremy Ginn, and he is one of the most attentive, kind, helpful people on Twitter to his followers. He doesn't have a huge following. I think he's around 3,000 to 4,000. But he is so engaged with all those people. He knows them personally. He gets on Zoom calls with them, and they really go to bat, and they really support the heck out of him. And I really respect that, and I strive to do the same. And then finally, optimizing your bio. This is what I was saying a second ago about, okay, I had 172,000 profile visits and only 4-ish thousand new followers. That's not a great conversion percentage. And the way that you convert people to following you is when they land on your profile, they need to get a sense of, yep, this is worth following. There's a really great thread on Twitter by a guy named Hey Blake. His name is Blake Emmel, but his handle is Hey Blake. And if you search for Hey Blake and optimize your bio, he has a list of like 30 different styles of writing your bio. So I just called a couple out here. The one that he uses, which I think is worth pulling out, because if this guy created a thread about how to optimize your bio, you can bet he's looked at a bunch of them, and he's probably played around a lot with optimizing his own. So the way that he structures his is probably pretty informed on how you can do your own. So his formula is starting with credibility and social proof, and then just saying, why should I follow you? Bonus points for using words like, free, grow, learn, and tips. Let's see if I can find my bio again that I shared with you a second ago. So my bio that you can see on the left-hand side here, I started with the show, as I shared, host of Creative Elements. That's telling you what I do. Creator of Tweet 100, which is something people are seeing more and more on Twitter these days. It's this hashtag Tweet 100. They're saying, what is that? If they search for the hashtag, they're going to find my profile. They're going to see Creator of Tweet 100 and a link to it. And then I tell you why you should follow me. Tweets for creators, community builders, and the NFT curious. So I'm leading with, here's what I do. Here's some social proof of what I've made that is probably something you have seen, Tweet 100. And here's what I talk about. Another one that I liked is Drew Riley's bio, just kind of being very simple and to the point. You know, he says, I'm a polymath. Here are the things that I care about. I'm building a community and newsletter for 35,000 plus entrepreneurs, and then he has a link to it. The more simple you can be, the better, honestly. You want to be more simple in what you're explaining. And so, yeah, just some inspiration. Search for Blake's full thread. I think you would enjoy it. I think it's worthwhile to read through. A few things to not do on Twitter is to add links to your tweets, especially in a single tweet, like a solo tweet. It's the only thing going out, or in the opening tweet of a thread. I don't have like specific proven facts from Twitter on this, but anecdotally from what I've seen and what other people will say, Twitter dampens the reach of tweets that have links going to external sites because they want you to stay on the site. So if you're linking elsewhere, that tweet is probably not going to perform as well as other tweets. So what people do to kind of get around this, because we're talking about getting people to your podcast, right? What people will do to get around this is they may add a link to the final tweet in their thread. So if the opening tweets do well, they will go there. Or what they'll do is wait until the tweet is already performing really well, and then they'll later tack on a tweet with a link to the end. You know, you've probably seen like a viral thread, and then you'll notice at the end people will be like, oh, since you're here, check this thing out. That's usually added later once the tweet is already moving virally. I don't recommend using a lot of hashtags. It's okay to use one, especially if it's tied to an active community. And this is something that I was really nervous about with this Tweet 100 experiment I was doing. I didn't explain this very well. Tweet 100 is a 100-day challenge for publishing more on Twitter. It's exactly what we're talking about here. I thought, you know, the more that I tweet, the more that my following grows. I want to create a public mechanism to force me to tweet more, to create more threads, because when I do that, I see my following grow. And so I made it into a public challenge. We have a leaderboard, so you can track your own progress. You can track how many followers you're gaining over time. And it's been really, really positive. But I was worried that if you had the Tweet 100 hashtag in your tweet, which is required for the leaderboard to work, like just for the automation to work, I had to filter for tweets by that hashtag. So I thought, man, is this going to actually sink people's ability to gain reach and to grow organically? And now what I found is the answer is no, if they're only using that one hashtag. Because what's really great about the Tweet 100 community is we've created a culture where you go to that hashtag and you support other people's tweets. You know what they're trying to do. They know what you're trying to do. You can really help boost each other by just spending 10 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day, going to the Tweet 100 hashtag and liking some of the other participants' tweets. And you're going to see some reciprocity. They're going to do that for you. So hashtags are okay if you use one, and especially if it's tied to a community, an active community. You don't want to go too broad with your content because, like I said, you want the right followers. So be specific, know what you're trying to talk about, hold to that, and do that really well. I have a few thread ideas for you here as you're thinking about using Twitter and using it from or for your podcast. I want to say thank you to Steve and Amy for your comments here on the live stream. Amy says, I've certainly noticed a decrease in reach with links, but never knew how to drive listens without links. I would think of it as a long-term game, Amy. Like, you're going to drive listens by driving a relationship with you. And if people start to like the content that you're posting on any platform, they're going to be more interested in learning more from you. And they're going to find your podcast. You can talk about your podcast even without linking directly to it. Because again, there's always friction. If you share a link to an episode of your podcast in a tweet or whatever, the presumption there is that people are going to literally stop what they're doing and now commit to listening to a 30 to 90 minute episode of a podcast. They'll probably notice it and say, I should listen to that later. In which case, you don't need the link in that tweet. What you need is just to create the awareness that you have a new episode and gather their attention. And you can do that without posting a link. John says, can you expand on negatives to more than one hashtag? John, I don't have any real data for this either, other than when you see a bunch of hashtags in a tweet, it just looks bad. And it doesn't look like what we expect good tweets to look like. People don't think of it very highly. It's hard to get people to like even really read it when it's just littered with hashtags like, hey, hashtag marketing, like just throwing all this stuff in there that we think is tying to conversations. But unless it's actually tied to an active community, people aren't discovering new tweets from hashtags anymore, really. Some thread ideas for your podcast. What I do the most right now is episode release threads where I hit the highlights of conversation. I'll kind of start with a tweet that just introduces the creator and kind of a hook of why I'm interested in talking with them. And then I'll go into a thread where I tell a story about their experience and their history and why I was interested. And then I'll go into the highlights of that conversation. Just hit like, we talked about this. This is a pull quote. You can go kind of a layer deeper into this and make a whole thread about like one specific engaging story that came out of the podcast that people can read that and they'll be glad that they just read that thread alone. And they'll say, you know what, that was interesting. I want to listen to the rest of the episode. You could do a takeaway thread where you say, here's the latest episode. Here are some takeaways that I had from the episode, kind of do the high level. And even though you may feel like, yeah, but doesn't that just like give away everything in the conversation? I hope not. Maybe, but I think that there is a lot on the table from hearing things in people's own words. Even if you have takeaways, that's like high level. You're not getting a lot of the detail, the deeper level nuance in the episode. You want to hook people into being interested in the conversation. And I think having threads around an engaging story or the takeaways that you had as the interviewer is a really great way to do that. There are also a few tools that I recommend if you're going to take Twitter more seriously, a few tools that I use and that I love. One of them is Hype Fury. Hype Fury is the best, like, all-inclusive tool that I've found for Twitter. And I am an affiliate for Hype Fury, so you can take that with a grain of salt if you want. But I was using the product before I was an affiliate because I loved it. And what it does a really, really good job of is helping you compose tweets, schedule tweets, and also identifying evergreen tweets, which is a concept I didn't really think about before. But Hype Fury pulls in your tweets into their interface, and they identify which tweets of yours had the best engagement. And they'll raise them up and basically say, like, is this evergreen? Like, would this be relevant a month from now, 2 months from now? And you can create this database of evergreen tweets, and it will automatically take those and it will retweet them periodically so that you're having activity on your Twitter at least once per day. It'll say, if you don't compose a tweet, if you don't schedule things for yourself, we will just take some of your evergreen tweets and retweet them. But another thing it does now is it has these inspiration tweets where if you say, I care about marketing, coding, and writing, it will say, okay, here are some tweets that performed well in those topics. And you can just use that as inspiration. And you certainly shouldn't copy or just plagiarize other people's tweets, but everything is a remix. So you can take this inspiration and do a quick remix on that and take your own spin on it, using it as a jumping off point. The inspiration and the evergreen tweets in Hype Fury are really, really helpful. Mary asks, is it a problem to have a personal Twitter account and an account for your podcast? I'm going to get to that in the Q&A, Mary. That's a really great question. ILO is an analytics tool that I also like. I'm also an affiliate for because I was using it. But it's advanced analytics for your Twitter account. This is just a snapshot of like the above the fold on the website, but it'll show you at a snapshot. Here are the number of followers you've gained in the last 30 days, your engagement average, your average number of impressions, profile clicks in the last 30 days, number of tweets in the 30 days. There's a lot of wisdom in the saying that what gets measured gets managed. So if you're making a habit of looking at the analytics for your account, you are going to naturally see those numbers increase. It's just human nature. We want to see green increasing numbers. Today was a bad day, obviously, because I'm all red here. But we are going to want to see those numbers go up. And by putting that in your face, you're more likely to see increases. Twemex is something I just discovered this week, and I am really, really enjoying it. It's a free Google Chrome extension, and what it looks like is when you're looking at somebody's profile, it will pull up a sidebar that you see on the right-hand side here and show you all-time highlights or recent highlights to see, okay, I just saw a tweet from this person. It showed up on my thread. I think I like what they have to say, but what else have they talked about before? And it'll pull up some of their best stuff. Something else you can use for inspiration, but also research. It's really great as a search tool, a little bit easier than the Twitter existing search. So it's really cool. You can just click the little arrows in the top right next to the Tweemex logo and hide it anytime that you want, but it's free and it's fantastic. And then TweetDeck is something that I have not implemented, to be honest, but so many people that I follow who take Twitter seriously, they all use TweetDeck, because what it sets up is basically an interface for you that has multiple columns. It's as if you're looking at, 2 to 10 Twitter feeds all at once. And instead of swiping through each list on your phone and looking only at one at a time, you can kind of aggregate that and see it all at a glance. You can also have a column that shows, your most recent followers, so you can see their bios, understand who's trying to follow you. This is something that I plan to implement in the next week or so. Finally getting around to it. And then finally, I wanted to share with you a couple of accounts that I think are good for inspiration if you're trying to use Twitter for your podcast. The first is Darknet Diaries by Jack Rhysider. Great podcast, great podcaster. He's an indie podcaster. He does like almost 400,000 downloads per episode as an indie podcaster. It's insane. But his podcast account and his personal account, Mary, there's partially an answer to your question. He uses both a personal and a podcast account, and both do a really great job of talking about the show, getting people interested. He does unique artwork for each episode, which helps because that's engaging when you share the photo of your artwork. But I would follow him to see how he's marketing his show. And then Polina Marinova, she does not have a podcast, but what she does really, really well, she's an author. I should say she's she's a writer. She writes full-length features of interesting people on her website, the profile. And what she does really well on Twitter is the storytelling I was talking about earlier with Threads. She does an incredible job of taking part of that profile, turning it into a really interesting, engaging engaging story that performs well just on Twitter. And then at the end of that, she links to her article. But it's a really good way to see how you can tell a story and engage people, get them interested in learning more and going deeper on the story. I also highly recommend joining our Tweet 100 challenge. It's totally free. It's really fun. The community is very, very supportive. It's very helpful. Just go to tweet100.com. That will get you signed up for the leaderboard. And what's crazy about the leaderboard, what you can see here, we're about 70 days in from when I started Tweet 100. So we have some people that have been doing this for almost 70 days. And you can see that some people have gained almost 5,000 followers in 70 days from using Twitter. Ariel Niesenblatt, who I know is a friend of the podcast movement community, she's number 6 on most followers gained. She's beating me. She's gained almost 2,000 in the last couple of months, and she's a really great example of somebody that's doing Tweet 100 very, very well. So really do recommend this if you want to get more active on Twitter and have some accountability and some built-in support for getting your tweet in front of more people. It's just at tweet100.com. All right, I would love to stay connected with you guys. I have a little bit of time for Q&A. I'm going to answer Mary's question here momentarily, but if you have more questions, please put them in the chat. I would love to answer them. But stay connected with me. Connect with me at jklaus on Twitter or Instagram. Check out Creative Elements, which you can find just by searching Creative Elements in your podcast player or at pod.link/elements. And Tweet 100 is a great way to get started with everything we've talked about here today. So I'm going to take a drink of water. I'm going to answer Mary's question. And if you have more questions, feel free to put them in the chat as well. All right. Is it a problem to have a personal Twitter account and an account for your podcast? No. I don't think there's a problem at all. Actually, I think that's probably really, really great if you're able to put time into growing both. That's the gotcha. I will not have a Creative Elements account on Twitter because I don't want to start from scratch. My personal account does well. I'm going to build off of that. I am experimenting with creating a separate account on Instagram, though, because I think there's more that I can do visually throughout the week than I can do in written form. So I'm going to try that out. But if you can do both and do them both well, I think it's a really great idea. I talked about Jack Reciter in Darknet Diaries. He does that on Twitter and does it really effectively. And the bonus of having 2 accounts is you can co-promote each from both. Like you have a built-in supporter that you can support your own stuff, which is like very, very helpful, should not be underestimated. But you got to do it well. And it can feel scary for people to go to your podcast account and you have very few followers. It looks like nobody cares. And I understand that feeling, which is another reason why I won't do it for Creative Elements. Starting from 0, it feels bad on Instagram because I make the show have such high standards of production quality. It's a bummer for people to think, wow, this is really great. This must be really popular, and then not have my social media account for it back it up yet. But you gotta stick with it and push hard. All right, moving on to Melissa's question. What advice do you have to get started on Twitter? I've never really felt connected to the platform when I've tried it before. Melissa, I really recommend joining Tweet 100 and connecting with the people there because they're kind, they're supportive. You want to build relationships on Twitter because those people will help you get started and support you when no one else will. The people that you are also close with and also supporting. So get started, find some people that you already appreciate their work, follow them, engage with their work, be someone that supports them. Don't be like annoying about it where you're just replying for replies' sake, but engage with their work, support them. They will notice you, they will appreciate you. And you just got to take it one day at a time. I know it sounds simple, and it's simple, but it's not easy. You just got to take it one day at a time, support other people. You're going to have more luck having conversations and getting connected with people who are not at like crazy levels of scale with their following, because everyone is trying to support each other when they're not quite at escape velocity. All right, moving on to C. McGlynn. My pod is fairly niche, women's soccer, but it also covers women's rights history, etc. Having a tough time expanding the audience and the idea. I'll speak to this. I'm not sure what the question is, other than I think it's a presumed question of how do I expand the audience or the idea. You got to find out where your existing listeners already hang out. I just ran a listener survey for Creative Elements listeners, and I was blown away by this response, actually. But a couple of the questions that I asked were, what other shows do you listen to? So that I can try to do a cross promo with those shows, or I can try to do a guest swap with those shows, or I can have, that host just on my show. So you got to find out where those people are hanging out already, because there will be other people in that community or in that space that will probably like your show also. And you've got to make an ask of your audience from time to time. You've got to ask them to share on your behalf, to leave a rating on Apple Podcasts. Like, you've got to ask them to help. And not everyone will take you up on it, especially not the first time that you ask. But if you make it a consistent part of your show, now I ask people to leave a rating on Apple Podcasts. When they do so, I will read that review on the air, like in the beginning of an episode. So I'm giving some love and support back to the people who gave me the review. And then that signals to other people like, oh, if I leave a review, Jay might read it out on the podcast and say my name, which is great. Moving on to John. John says, feeling stretched, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, podcast, e-bulletin. Do you have favorite recommendations for time saver tools like TweetDecks, but perhaps at a broader level? John, my recommendation is to just do fewer. Like, if you feel stretched, pick the ones that are not performing well and just drop them. Because it's a lot easier to take a successful channel and the audience that is there and then move them over to a new channel and start with a good base than it is to start at zero with all of these and try to build them up. I would really recommend starting simpler and doing fewer. And I feel you, because I'm doing all the same. I'm not doing Facebook. I'm doing Twitter, Instagram, podcasts, and newsletter. Time-saving tools is more like, how can you audit your own process and figure out, where am I not being efficient? Where can I create efficiencies? How can I create more templates to get me started with this? Or how can I construct my show notes in such a way that is easy to port over to my newsletter, so that it's easy to port over to the website? I can pull it into a thread. Like, just got to be more efficient if you're not willing to drop things. Steve says, good stuff, especially about threads and limiting one hashtag. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I know we're just about at time. So unless we see anything else roll in here, I think we can call it. Please do connect with me on Twitter at jklaus. Would love to connect with you there. Thanks for coming here. If you enjoyed this, tweet at me. Let me know. Let me know that you enjoyed this and any other questions that you have. Erica says just follow you on Twitter. Love that. Follow me. Follow the podcast. I hope you listen to it. Hope you enjoy it. And I hope this is just the start of our own online connection. Thanks, Podcast Movement, for having me. See you in the next one.